Folks, welcome to this session. My name is Neidhardt with Checkpoint Software. You guys can hear me okay in the back? Invariably, a speaker moves away from the microphone, right? And volume goes up and down, so I'll try to be careful about that. This session is Jumpstarting Your Incident Response Plan, and it's focused on helping you either start an incident response program or maybe improve one that you got along the way. I'm with Checkpoint Software, and we have a booth out there. My co-speaker, Denise, Mellor from the Franchise Tax Board will be speaking as well. And there should be something for everybody. Either you set up an incident response plan or maybe you're an incident response handler. Let's get a show of hands. How many of you consider yourselves to be incident response program managers? You're responsible for getting a program started or continuing one, nurturing it. You help set policy, see that incident handlers are recruited, and so forth. Okay, a few of you. How many folks are incident handlers, the front line? You investigate logs, do the analysis, take snapshots, okay. So we have a mix, and then I know some of you maybe did or didn't raise your hand, but probably some of you wear both hats. How many folks do incident program management and the incident handling? You are it. Maybe a one-man show? Okay, at least one, yeah, that's not unusual. There should be something for everybody in our presentation. Let's start off by talking about what we mean by incident response. And I'll give you an example from maybe health and safety. So in an incident response scenario, something bad has happened or is going to happen. We have a team of highly trained, well-equipped, fancily dressed experts who arrive at the scene, analyze the situation, and prescribe some mitigating methods, and they take care of the situation. This is kind of the ideal of incident response from one perspective, maybe how it would look in a movie if it was perfect, right? This is the ideal that we would like it to be. Now, I know, unfortunately, in the real world, it's not necessarily always like that. We find that some of us are not prepared either for an incident or maybe when it comes time to talk to media or to law enforcement. We have controls set in place, but we're not necessarily enforcing them. From the earlier presentation you saw, the restraining bolts on the droids were not always in use. And the bad guys know this and can get past our defenses because we're not necessarily enforcing controls that we have or we don't have controls. So what might we do about this situation? How do we improve our incident response program? Now, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can steal with pride. I stole that phrase from my time at Intel from other resources, of which there are many. Now, I know NIST is a popular one. I know it's mandated, I think, for California state agencies. How many folks are from a California state agency? So you're probably quite a few, okay? You're very familiar with NIST. Even if you're not a California state agency, if you're working with the federal government, maybe exchanging data, they're going to like NIST standards. So that's going to be very common in our sphere. There are excellent materials from Carnegie Mellon University. Their CERT program has been in existence for over 20 years, I think. Lots of good materials there. If you're interested in European Union standards for some reason, there's an equivalent group called AISO. They produce materials and training and so forth. And there's a FIRST forum. There's FIRST and there's GFIRST, but they produce materials. And they put on events, too. I think they just had a show in San Diego earlier this year. So that's another resource of material. If you're into AISO standards, there's an AISO standard related to incident response. And if you like old school plain text RFCs, there are a couple of RFCs related to incident response. Now, the good news is you don't have to read all of this. You might fall comatose. I don't expect you to go through all that material, but they all share a lot of things in common, and we can synthesize some information from all the frameworks. Whichever one you use, they're going to have a lot of things in common. So let's look at this from the perspective of an incident response loop that's already in process. And we'll start off with step one, monitoring, notification, listening. So in my sports analogy, these coaches are tasked with recruiting players to their team. They talk to other players. They listen to sports analysts. They go to draft day activities. They look at past performance. In the same way in our environment, in cybersecurity incident response, we receive input from firewalls and IPS systems. We get calls to the help desk from users. We have systems administrators who come to us and say, you know, the web servers have been giving this funny error message consistently over the last couple of days. We get vendor bulletins like Microsoft Patch Tuesday. We get industry news. Maybe some of you read Krebs on security. That's where I get all my credit card hack information. So there are all these sources of information that come into us in step one. And unfortunately, we can't use it all. We can't investigate every spam email, every log entry, review every packet. So in our process, as we go from step one to step two, there has to be a way to decide which items we are going to investigate. Most of the frameworks use different words or vocabulary for this, but in general, we have some form of input. We're going to call that an event. And some of those events get promoted to incidents. And the incident is one we're actually going to investigate. So how do we make that determination of what gets promoted? A classical one definition is harm or the attempt to harm. So somebody has used a vulnerability against a web server, let's say, and the web server crashed. So there was obvious harm. Sometimes they try a vulnerability against a system that's the wrong kind. They used, say, a Microsoft IIS vulnerability against your Linux web server. It didn't work. Some people consider that interesting, and some people don't. Sometimes it's irrelevant. Sometimes that's a prelude to further attacks. So that's one way we can think of which ones we're going to investigate and which ones are not. Now, that's a very technological way of looking at it, though. Probably in your organizations, you'll also have policy, violation of policy, or the attempt to violate policy. So let's say I download some little video game from the internet on my work computer, and it triggers your logs, and you come running over and you say that's a violation of policy, and because that's a common way that malware gets into our organizations, right? Downloads. So you look it over, and it turns out it's completely harmless and benign. There was no harm. There was no intent to harm. But I used my work computer during the day using work resources to download a video game, which is against policy for various reasons, right? So that means our incident response programs have to incorporate not just technological threats, but also our organization's policy. And that policy is going to be important throughout our discussion today. I'm going to emphasize that a couple of times, and Denise will comment on that as well. If you want to be less formal and programmatic about the definition, some of the frameworks say, if you take an event and you turn it into an incident, then that means you're actually going to do something about it. You've assigned a ticket number to it maybe, you've assigned it to an incident handler, and something's actually going to be done about it. They advise us, don't turn every event into an incident if you're not going to do something about it. And then to be even more simple, if I don't look into this, I might get into trouble, right? So we look at the earlier example, an IIS exploit against a Linux web server. There was no harm. There was attempt to harm, but it was never going to work. But the next day, they try the right one, and it gets through. I was warned 24 hours in advance. I didn't do anything about it. So this is going to be based on your organization's policy, but which ones are important enough for us to investigate? And it will also depend on your resource, right? How many incident handlers you actually have to assign things to. But eventually, you're going to decide which ones you're going to investigate, and that takes us to step two, which is investigation. Now, some of these frameworks say this is just looking into it. Some of them call for triage or first aid, stop the bleeding. So an example would be, we consider this server to be compromised. Maybe I just pull it off the network to stop the bleeding, right? If hackers are retrieving information from it. But we haven't actually solved the problem long term. What's really important about step two, though, is that we've assigned resources to the problem, and they're going to do something about it. So back to our sports analogy, these coaches have selected some players. They say, we particularly are interested in these four. So incident handler 1, you take those 2. And incident handler 2, you take those 2. So there's been an obvious assignment here, right? And that's good. However, you may notice he didn't exactly say what you were supposed to do. What do you mean by take? So maybe the first coach takes his gentleman into a classroom and quizzes them on football topics. The other fellow takes his golfing or fishing or takes a nap. You take what? You didn't say what you were going to do, right? So what our policy is on what action we're going to take is an important part of this process. So probably when Heartbleed came out, right, and our incident programs were all tested, what are we going to do about it? How many systems are going to be impacted by this? What's our policy on web servers that use the OpenSSL libraries? What is it we're supposed to do? Some of you probably knew exactly what you were going to do, and you did exactly that. Others of us ran around with our heads cut off, like chickens with their heads cut off, and didn't have a clear direction. So let's rewind a little bit. and see what these coaches might have done. So they seek out an appropriate high level of authority in their organization. Maybe someone with a penchant for clear and careful instructions or explanations. Maybe not, but an appropriate level of authority in their organization, and they get a clear policy statement. So if I believe a web server has been compromised, what steps do I have to take before I'm allowed to shut that off, right? Sometimes that's a technological decision, sometimes it's a political decision. If the server in question or the business service is producing revenue, it's taking in registrations of titles or vehicles or property, or folks are using this website to get re-credentialed for some license that they hold with the state, let's say, it's revenue producing, that's going to impact whether you're allowed to take that system offline or not. Let's say that I'm an assemblyman with the state legislature and the re-election is in 2 days, and I've got a website that describes my voting history and my background and my platform, and you think that web server has been compromised and it ought to be taken down. You go to your manager and they say, that's crazy, the election's in 2 days. There's obviously an impact there, and your policy's not clear, and you decide to just wait and see what happens. And sure enough, the anonymous hacking group defaces my site, I lose the election, and I come looking for you. So it has to be clear in advance when we do and do not interrupt mission critical services. That has to be defined in advance. So we've got our clear policy statement, and now our response. In this example, they make their selections of players, they consult with general managers and team owners, and everyone's happy they've made their selection. In our scenario with cybersecurity, you've decided what action you're going to take. You remediated, you've removed the malware, you've re-imaged the server, you've cleaned out the mail cache. Whatever the appropriate remediation is, you've taken it, and we're done, right? We closed the loop. No, not exactly. This is something we all forget, unfortunately, is the last step, closure. The frameworks tell us there's got to be a lessons learned. Some people call that the post-mortem. But what did we learn in this incident? How could we prevent this from happening again? We record this for ourselves to improve our incident response program. We might be recording this for management to demonstrate what it is we're bringing to the table. As Kelman said in the keynote, if you're doing your job well, nobody knows, right? So we need to document our successes in incident response and mitigation. If it's going to go to trial, it's involving law enforcement, then there's got to be excellent documentation on what actions we did and didn't take. And if you can work in an aspect of celebration as you do close out these incidents, that will make the program more effective. And I think we would all enjoy exactly doing that, right? Now these steps, and step 4 would lead to step 1. I call it the loop, right? We're always listening and monitoring. We investigate incidents. We come back to step 1. This loop, however, did not spring into existence on its own. Somebody had to set this up from the beginning, and that foundation has to be solid. Otherwise, those steps are probably not going to be terribly effective. So I'm going to call these step 0. Some of the frameworks call this premium services. Some of them call it incident management, incident program management, whatever you want to call it. Some thinking went into this to set the program up from the beginning. You established the loop. You provided training for your users and your teams. You made some decisions. Who's allowed to talk to media? Usually there's one point of contact for that, right? When the news media comes asking about maybe some incident has become public knowledge, who gets to talk to media? When do they talk to media? How much do they say? If there's something to do with law enforcement, we want maybe the FBI to investigate something, when do we make that decision? How much do we share with them? If we share with our fellow agencies, whether state or county or city or private industry, how much knowledge do we share and how much do we keep close to our chest? That all has to be decided in advance in kind of step 0. And then there's some trust aspects too. If we go to a business process owner and we say, at any moment's notice, if I think it's necessary to take your business critical server down, I want the authority to do that. I need you to trust me to make that decision. And then on the flip side, my incident handlers, I've got to trust them that they know when to make that decision. So all these things go into making the program effective from the get-go. And again, I'll emphasize what I think are the most important ones. What is our policy when it comes to interfering with a mission-critical service or function? If I need to take down a really important server, especially one that's producing revenue, what are the steps I have to take to do that? And where does my authority to do this come from? As an incident program or handlers, we may think we know the appropriate process and we're careful. We don't take servers down without really thinking about it. But nobody gave us the authority to do that, right? That's probably not going to end well. So if we can get a high-level sponsor, a champion, that signs off on our program, that's going to make our activity much more effective when I come to a business owner and say, I need to take this service offline, and I have the authority to do so. Maybe I've got a cool badge. But some authority has been granted to me, right? So these are all the step 0 parts of the program. Another way to look at this would be, how many resources do we have, right? So let's think about manpower, the folks who will run the program. And let's say that the gold plan, the ideal is, I've got plenty of manpower. I've got staff to do incident program management, and I've got plenty of incident handlers, and I've got lots of money in my budget for training for both things. So who falls into the gold category? Who's got plenty of staff and plenty of budget for training? At least one hand? Nobody? Okay. So let's assume this is the ideal that we would shoot for. You know, we press management to get training into the budget, that we need staff to do this. So maybe that's our gold program approach, right? If we've got this, there is training specific for folks who do the program management versus training specifically for folks who do the incident handling. So maybe you feel you fall into the silver plan. You've got staff, but not budget for training. Where you've got budget for training, you've only got 1 or 2 people. So what I would recommend is at least one person's got to be the program management owner. Someone has to own the plan. And you may say that should be 50-50. This is such an important thing. I'm going to split the team in half if I have that many resources. But maybe you don't, right? So we don't want too many chiefs and not enough Indians. We've got to have some incident handlers. So you'll have to think about how you split that up. If you've got money for training, then again, there is training specifically for that. And I would like to see at least one person go to the training specifically for program management, and at least one other go to training for incident handling. So how many folks feel they fall maybe into the silver range? You've got some staff and some budget for training, at least a couple. That's not very many hands. You're worrying me. And you know the next step, you know what's coming up, is the bronze plan, right? And unfortunately, we do see this where maybe there's a very, very small team, no budget for training. It could be that you are it. You are the incident program. You are the manager. You are the incident handler. You're the only one who does this. It could be other duties as assigned, right? That's a terrible phrase to hear, but you've got your own job responsibilities already, and incident handling and this program is something new that's been added to your plate, and we want it to start tomorrow. Well, why would someone say we need this to start tomorrow? What would have been the trigger? Something bad happened. There was an event, right? Our incident response efforts were tested and found wanting. So we need this improved, and we need it done tomorrow. So if you're in this precarious position, I would suggest that you've got to have the clear policy. You know, I'll emphasize that again. You've got to have a clear policy on interrupting business critical services, and it should be clear from whom your authority comes. It'd be nice if that's in writing, maybe a general email out to the organization. But it's clear that there's authority to do this. There's a clear policy. Different organizations like NIST and CERT and SANS have materials that you can study on your own. It may be that you end up self-training, doing exactly that, and starting right away. So even if you have very, very little staff and budget for training, there's still some things you could do to improve or start your incident response program. So how many folks feel that they're in the bronze category? There's no staff, there's no budget for training. It's maybe a one-man show, or one-person show, I should say. Okay, that's a fair distribution. So a lot of what I've been talking about is, I don't want to say theoretical, but it's like programmatic. It's based on things that have been developed over the last 20 years. None of this information is new, right, that I've stolen from NIST and from CERT and from SANS and so forth. But it would be nice to hear some real-world experiences from someone who's actually done this, who's groomed, nurtured an incident response program, and can tell us some of the things that happened behind the scenes that made that a success. So we have a special speaker today, the Chief Security Officer from the California Franchise Tax Board. So please help me to welcome Denise Mellor. Denise?
Thank you. I'm a little scared by the number of hands that you're at. That's a little frightening. But I want to congratulate you for being here because you're taking the first step in the right direction and trying to learn more about incident response handling. So about 10 years ago, I got involved in incident response handling. I didn't know I was getting involved in it, but that's really what it was. I had turned into kind of a problem solver. And that's really all this is. So if you have your normal problem-solving skills, when you put your problem-solving hat on, this whole thing is about creating a framework for solving a problem. So Carl had asked me to talk about some real-world experiences, and what I'm going to try to do is kind of tie that into the themes that he's already talked about. He mentioned that one most important thing is to have a policy on who is your decision maker. I can't tell you how important that is, because when you have a situation, real world, names removed to protect the guilty or innocent, you can have a situation like this. It is April 12th. You're at the Franchise Tax Board. What happens on April 15th? Exactly. Can you imagine what the traffic does to our website around that time when people are going, oh, my taxes are due in a couple days, and I don't know what I owe, and I don't know what form I need, and I don't know any of that stuff. And so you start getting alerts that look suspicious. Not scary, really bad, oh my God, we have to go unplug something. But, that doesn't look normal. So you have to decide, what are you going to do? You monitor it for a little bit, and then you get to that point where you're like, this has been going on long enough, and it's that time of year where we really can't afford to play around, if you will. So you call it a CERT. For us, it's a computer incident response team. And what that means is, and it's formalized, and there's a sample of a CERT document in your handouts. What that means is we pull a group of experts into a room with a CERT captain who has delegated authority to make decisions. And our document says that. This person is delegated to tell those people, drop what you're doing, come to this meeting. We've got a process to contact those people, because as you can imagine, when you're in the middle of an incident going on, you don't have time to go look up everybody's phone numbers. And if it's in the middle of the night, do you even know how to contact people? So you can't wait until you have an incident to get all that information together. So you meet, and you start talking about, okay, what are you seeing, and what are you seeing on that server, and what's the network look like, and is there any impact to our external customers? Are they still able to get what they need done? What do we think might be going on? You start to ask yourself all those questions, and I would suggest in your plan, whatever format you decide to use, whatever format works for you, I would strongly suggest that you create a list of questions that you're going to ask your incident response team. Just anything that you can think of that you might want to know. Because you cannot predict or write a manual to respond to any incident that you might encounter. Every incident is different. So create a checklist. Start asking, is it a network issue? Is it a server issue? Are we being attacked? Is it a denial of service? What exactly is it? Is it a vulnerability? Are we being attacked by an insider? What's going on? Because that's where you'll start to get where you've got enough information to make good decisions moving forward. So back to my example. So one of the things that we did was we looked at any changes that we had made to our network, to servers. We have a change management process. Okay? Ours is pretty formalized. We're a big organization. We have a lot at risk. You might be a small organization, and you might say, Denise, I'm lucky. I got one server, one network guy. They all do the same thing. What are you talking about, change management? Well, anybody can do change management. Keep a log of the changes that you make. Because keeping along with this theme that I'm talking about, remember we've got funny traffic. It looks like we're being attacked, but we can't see really anything coming from the outside. So we think we might be being attacked from the inside. Do we have a bad person on the inside? What the heck is going on? We're now into day 2. We're getting closer to the 15th. We're starting to get a little bit more panicked. And somebody says, did we go back through the change requests carefully? Oh, yeah, we did. Let's go through them again. Okay, because we're getting ready to take some drastic measures. We've got the 15th bearing down on us. So we go back through our change requests with a fine-tooth comb. What we find is there was a change made. It was a normal, routine, daily activity, normal change order. The problem was the experienced staff member was in the wrong environment. And they made a change that created a loop that looked like we had systems attacking us from the inside. Now, what I didn't tell you is we had actually gone, because it looked like there were some desktop PCs that were attacking us. We had actually gone and unplugged those desktop PCs. We didn't know. Except when we got to one desktop PC and there was dust on it because the person had been on vacation for 2 weeks, we figured, this is probably not the problem, that thing's been off. So my message to you is we were ready to take some pretty drastic measures. We weren't even really being attacked by anyone doing anything negative, and we couldn't see any damage to our system. But it was suspicious traffic that was making us nervous right when we had a high-risk time period bearing down on us. So that goes back to when you're creating your plan, you have to consider things like, one, who has the authority to pull the plug? Who has the authority to tell that person to pull the plug? And will they really pull the plug when you tell them to do it? Because do they believe that you have the authority to tell them to pull the plug? If you're an organization where you don't do anything without your executive officer knowing what you're doing or your director knowing what you're doing, that's okay too. But when you're creating your plan and you're documenting who you're going to call and when, ask the director, may I have your home number? Because if I need to call you at 2 a.m. to get your permission to unplug everything, I want to make sure I can get a hold of you. Usually they say, well, okay, and maybe not. That's okay too. But make sure you have that information documented. And the other thing I want to share is make sure you know what your risk tolerance is. You might be an organization that's sharing non-confidential information. You're providing a service to your constituents, whatever they may be. So maybe you have a really high risk tolerance. Maybe you're going to let some activity continue on so that you can figure out where the bad guys are and what they're really trying to do. If that's okay for your organization, that's great. The MSISAC and those other organizations that help you with incident handling, they love that information because it helps them go back and catch bad guys. But maybe your tolerance is not that. Maybe you see data leaking and you've got to stop it. You don't have time to help try to figure out what that is. Those are going to be all important questions to know. Where is your risk tolerance? What's your organization going to accept? One other piece is knowing your business organization, and that was kind of brought out in the Star Wars presentation. If you don't know what your organization's business functions are, it's very hard for you to make a recommendation to the business owners about what to do. And if you go to them and like in my case, April 15th, and say, you know, we're going to pull the plug, no one can e-file their tax return, they're going to look at me like, what the heck is the matter with you? Do you not understand what we do around here? That's my organization. Your organization might be very different. You know, DMV, people have registrations due every day. It's not a, you know, once or twice a year when you have a couple filing dates. They've got a very different business model about when they need to be up and how often they need to be up. And if you don't know what that is for your organization, it's going to be hard for you to have an effective communication plan. Because in my organization, when we have things going on, how many people remember Zotab? You guys are too young for Zotab. So the Franchise Tax Board got hit by Zotab. It was a virus. Someone got it on their PC, and it spread through our network. It resulted in us not being able to cashier money for 3 days. That's a pretty big deal for us, and that's a pretty big deal for the state. We bring in 65% of the general fund revenue. So do you think it was critical that we had a CERT plan at that time so that we could figure out what was going on, what we needed to do, and how we were going to get back in business? And do you think that it was critical that we knew what our #1 priority was, our #1 business priority? Because it was to get those cashier people back online, safe, uninfected, but to get them back online. So having that built into your list of checklist questions, what's the impact to the business, what time of year is it? Get one of the business people on your CERT team, or 2 or 3 or whatever you need for your organization to get that business represented. When they're part of your team and they're helping you make those decisions, you're going to have a much better outcome because they're going to be hearing or asking questions, and some of it's going to be over their head. Got some technical people in the room, it's going to be over their head. But if you're the incident handler or you're the program manager responsible for making sure you've got incident handling, pull them aside and ask them, did you understand that? Do you have questions? Are we accurately reflecting what your business needs are? And you'll have a partner that will be much more cooperative and be supportive of you doing what you need to do. Grab a drink of water real quick, excuse me. So do you guys have any questions so far? No? Looked like you thought about it. Don't be shy.
No, I'm just thinking, like, with the virus, I mean, I've run into that. I was in the Air Force quite a while ago, and had, like, when the I Love You virus came out, kind of had to make a snap decision. But at what point, I mean, with something like that, how bad does it get before you decide, you know, pull the plug? Like 10 machines, 100 machines, it depends on your organization, but.
That's why it's critical that you have those discussions early on, because for one organization, it might be one machine because it's the one machine that has the keys to all the kingdom. You know, it might be a server, and there can be so much damage. Maybe in the case of mine where it looked like there were a couple desktops that were attacking, they weren't high access. They didn't have high levels of access to system resources, so we kind of left them on for a little while to see if we could figure out what was going on before we went and unplugged them. So it's really about knowing your organization and knowing, what that tolerance is. And I guarantee you, if you're just starting out, you're not going to know a whole lot. It's going to take some practice. And that's one other thing that I want to talk about. If you don't already have a plan and you're building a plan, you need to exercise it. And if you're an incident handler and maybe your executive team is not super supportive yet and doesn't see the value, exercise it with a peer. Once you get that down, pull your supervisor in and say, hey, we've created this plan in case this happens, and we want to show you what we've done. And then they begin to see the value and understand what it does for the organization, right? So sell up. If you're one of those program managers that is struggling with not having the staff to create the plan, and maybe you're not technical. I am not technical. So I'm an AISO that is not super technical. I've had to learn, but I have a really great group of technical staff. I call myself a risk manager. That's my job. I manage risk for my department. And so my job is to ask those hard questions about, do we have a plan? Do we know the answers to those hard questions? Or do we at least think we know the answers to the hard questions and we'll reevaluate as we go? Right? That's my job. I don't have to I don't have to know how to actually go find the exact server to pull the plug. Because when I say pull the plug, we pull the plug. But it's based on that really smart team of folks that have given me a lot of information about what's the risk, are we actually losing data? Are we being attacked? Is someone just poking around? What exactly is going on? So that's my job. So if you're that program manager that wants to start a program and you don't have the staff, that's okay. Sit down and grab the shell. And then when you've got kind of a shell developed, find someone who has an interest in it, and then suck them into this fun project that's really cool. Because I guarantee you, most people who are the asset owners, they don't want for example, if you're a server administrator, you don't want your server compromised, right? I mean, for those of you that were in the technical trenches, you want your box up, and you're very protective of your box. That's what I've found. And that's how I've gotten our IT folks interested, because they care about their world, and they don't want that to happen. So if I can show them how working together, we all have the same objective, then we're going to be much more successful. So, other questions? I could share more examples, but
Odd question.
okay.
So I see the template references 5340C, so I'm not real familiar with that. Does that show a template also? Is it similar to this, or what's in 5340C?
What page are you on?
On page 5, Great Instant Recovery Plan.
I think the 5340C is the replacement SIM 65C. So if you're a state entity that has reporting requirements, that's a form that you're going to fill out, letting NTAC, or once you've notified NTAC that you have an incident.
I have heard that.
Yeah, they changed the numbers on us.
Sorry.
But now they do correspond with the actual state administrative manual section that requires you to do that activity. So once you get used to the new nomenclature, it's actually kind of cool. So the documents that you have are, one is an overview of how to create an incident response plan. And if you take nothing else away, Carl has provided in your packet a list of the references that he cited. When you look at those, if this is not something that's your passion, you're going to be overwhelmed. I was when I first started, and that's okay. Figure out, based on your organization and what your risk, what those things are if you're attacked. And start simple. You know, sit down and think, okay, if we get a virus, what do I care about? Who are my resources? Who's my one server administrator? If you're a big organization, who's my technical manager who can get me the resources that I need? And just start kind of laying all that out. And so that one document, the computer incident response team one, is more focused on responding to the incident. The other one is more focused on the whole thing from beginning to end, and is kind of a wrapper of all of the activities. So it's important that you start if you haven't already started. If you have something, pull it out, dust it off. Does it still apply in today's world if it's 10 years old? Exercise it. Again, if you can do nothing else besides get a peer to exercise it with you, and you have something, when you get hit, because we all know it's not if, right? It's when. There will be some incident, whether it's truly nefarious or whether you're attacking yourselves like we were doing because of a mistake in a change request. You're going to have something. And if you're the one that comes up and says, well, you know, I kind of created this plan that we can follow, you're the hero for the day, right? Because you've at least got something to follow. There's some other resources that you can use that we did not list. If you're an organization that also does physical security or physical security response, and you have an emergency response plan, you're going to want to make sure that those plans are linked.
Can you elaborate on physical security?
Sure. So depending on what your background is, so at Franchise Tax Board, we have 6,500 people. The emergency responders have told us if there's a regional event, they're not coming to us because we're big, we can take care of ourselves. They're going to go to the hospitals, the schools, and they're going to take care of all those folks. So given that we produce 65% of the general fund, and I'm not telling you this to brag about my organization, I'm telling you this because I know what our business is. And so California is the 8th largest economy in the world. We heard that yesterday again. If you want to impact California and send a message, somebody who produces 65% of the general fund for the 8th largest economy in the world might be an attractive target, right? So when we have a physical security event, somebody calls in a bomb threat or some other incident, in the back of my emergency responder's head is, do we have something else going on? Do I need to be worried about some sort of cyber event? Am I being distracted by a physical event so somebody can do something in the cyber world? So that's what I mean by linking those. And even if you are not necessarily responsible for emergency response at your organization, as a cyber security incident responder, you should be thinking about that as well. Did they get us all out of the building so we won't see the bad traffic coming in on our intrusion detection system? You know, are you not going to get your alerts and they can go do it? You know, they've been sitting there waiting. So, and sometimes that's what will happen, right? The bad guys will get in, they'll have scoped out your network, and they'll just sit there waiting. In fact, they purposely tried to do no harm so you didn't know they were there. Create a incident, and then they go in, they have some fun while you're all outside trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, no, we don't. No. But maybe your organization, you would. That's what I'm trying to say. Everybody is really different. And it's important that you know that. So I know the facts about my organization, and I make it my business to stay connected to that. I make it my business to build relationships with the business areas. I want them to know that even though I haven't worked in the business in over 10 years, I still think about that when I'm making decisions. It's a lot of pressure when you're sitting in that computer incident response team group and somebody says, we're at that point where we really do need to pull the plug. What are you going to do? Fortunately, I haven't had to do it since SOTOP, but it's a lot of responsibility if you're that person. So, you know, whoever that person is in your organization, you have to make sure that they have the guts to pull the trigger as well. So that's another important factor. Because we literally did. We took ourselves offline with SOTOP. We had to, just to stop the madness. Another thing in the plan is communication. So if you got to pull the plug, you're now going to have however many employees you have that maybe can no longer do their work. It's not like the old days where you came into work, you got your paper out of your inbox, and you did whatever you needed to do and maybe sent something to typing and then moved on, right? We are like tied to our technology. And so many people can't do their job if you're not up and running. So what are you going to do with those people? Are you going to let them come to work? Are you going to tell them to stay home? Are you going to have them do some other work? Right? So that has to be a critical part of your plan is, one, communication. Again, if your business partners are in your response team meeting, then they're going to have an inkling that something's going on, then they can be working on that. But that's where your business continuity plans come in, right? How are you going to maintain your continuity of operations? So all this stuff is tied together. And if you want to hook to maybe sell needing some resources or a little bit of funding to do it, maybe hook it into your business continuity plan. Most of us are all required to do that if you're part of a government organization. So I've gotten very creative at finding ways to say I need resources to do this under this requirement. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to look at what those mandates are and say, hey, there's this mandate, we've got that. You might not get it right away, but once you get the bug started in someone's ear and they begin to see the value. We also used real-world examples from what's going on in the media. Not Chicken Little. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in the sky is falling and we're next, and so, oh my God, you need to do this. That doesn't work. But anytime that there's an incident in the media, my folks sit down, we collect all the information that we can about the incident. So for us, there was a big one, I think it's 2 years ago now in South Carolina. South Carolina Department of Revenue was hit, right? Boy, did that hit home. So we sat down and we took all the facts that we knew about that breach and said, how would we have been able to defend against that? If yes, how? And we kind of walked through. If no, what do we need to do differently? What do we need to put in place? Where's the hole in our layered defense process that we need to do? And then we go forward with some budget proposals based on, hey, this happened to someone else. We've analyzed the facts as best as we can, and here's where we are. So use those things to create your business model, if you will. Again, do not do doom and gloom. It doesn't work. But create a business model for supporting what you need to do in your organization. And again, you guys have all taken the right first step because you're here and you're interested. Other questions?
But training-wise, I mean, it gets difficult because what one product does, there's so much overlap between the next product. I mean, how do you kind of pick from the incident responses a focus on, like, if it's in that PE policy or trigger checkpoint, whoever, do you guys kind of go, we're kind of aiming in this direction just because people need to understand the technology and protecting us? Or, you know what I'm saying? Because there's lots of multiple layers of defense you can try, and best in breed, and at some point it gets convoluted too. You have some different vendors. Nobody really is an expert in any one specific area.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of going back and looking at your organization and figuring out what your assets are, where they are, how you're already protecting them, and then where your holes are. And then I start looking to what's my business requirement. And sorry, vendors, but forget who the vendor is. I care about what my business requirements are. And then based on what my business requirements are, that drives out who can produce what I need to meet my business requirements. So I'm not sure that really answers your question. Are you talking about in terms of training or?
I mean, because, I mean, if you end up having 4 different products that are sort of intermingled on your network and they're all doing security, at some point, I mean, you sort of aim in one direction and say, you know, these guys seem to do everything pretty well. Let's go with them so that, you know, our 100 people can train on, you know, one specific vendor's type, you know, solution, or best in breed and, you know, try to get different sections trained up on different areas.
Let's see how I'm gonna. I guess with regard to incident response, I still don't know that I would look at one particular vendor. I would look at, again, where my gaps are, and that would drive what I'm going to focus on. I mean, I think I kind of sort of understand what you're saying. How do I focus in one area? But it goes back to your business requirements and where your holes are and what your gaps are. In terms of understanding those different tools and how they work and how that relates to responding to your incident, that if that's your organization, then it's going to be important that you have the expert that understands that tool in your room so that they can speak to, you know, this device says XYZ, and that means ABC, and how does that correlate with the other one, and you get those 2 experts talking, okay, to try to interpret what your results are. Unless, I mean, you know, there are SIM tools out there, but again, it depends on your architecture, it depends on what you've got in-house and that kind of thing, so. Other questions? We're about at time. I'm getting the. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Denise. This symposium, when we go through the process of preparing for it, we pick topics. What topics do we think folks will want to hear about? Now, I work for a security vendor. I'd love to tell you about my products, but that's not what we decided folks wanted to hear. We have an impression that incident response is something many people feel that their plan either doesn't exist or could stand improvement. Now, in 45 minutes, we can't teach you how to do incident response, right? And so I wanted to bring, from an engineer's perspective, process, frameworks, and so forth. That's why I wanted you to take that handout with you. But we also wanted real-world experience from Denise, somebody who's actually done it. It could advise you on things that will help you to gain funding, for example, or to make things effective in your organization. So hopefully there was something for all of you to take back with you, and we appreciate your attendance. I want to thank Denise again from the Franchise Tax Board, and Katrina Yang from the State CIO office, who helped to make this event possible for us. I'm Carl Neidhardt with Checkpoint Software. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the symposium.